and welcome to episode 3 of The Gut Solution. I'm your host, Sarah Otto. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the impact the gut has on our minds. This has never been more important than it is right now. Mental disorders are on the rise worldwide. 300 million people suffer from depression, and anxiety affects 18% of the population. Meanwhile, 500,000 cases of Alzheimer's will be diagnosed this year. Deaths from Alzheimer's have increased by 123% since the year 2000, making it the 6th leading cause of death. And 1 in 10 people over 65 will suffer from dementia. This is a staggering incidence of poor mental health. However, there is hope, and that is because of the gut. Why is gut health so important for brain health?
Huge connection there. Not only do we have this highway called the vagus nerve that goes from our central nervous system all the way down to our enteric nervous system, which is our second brain, which is in our gut, but we also produce about 70 to 80% of our neurotransmitters in our gut. So if we're having problems, if we're already having digestive issues, if we're already having inflammation in our gut, if we're having overgrowth of yeast or bacteria or whatever it might be, SIBO, that's going to pose a challenge on your body to not only absorb the nutrients that are the cofactors for your neurotransmitters, but it's going to absorb the ability to actually express the neurotransmitters themselves. So treating your gut is how you treat your brain. If you're dealing with anxiety, with depression, if you've got bipolar, if you've got schizophrenia, many of my patients with autism, it begins in the gut, and we've got to make sure that we start there.
And what's fascinating is that modern science is changing the way that we think about this now, where we now understand that when you cause damage to the gut due to this bidirectional flow, when you damage the gut, it does manifest with symptoms in the gut, meaning irritable bowel syndrome, but it also can produce anxiety, neuroticism, depression, all of these different things. And this is part of the reason why you can actually treat anxiety and depression by correcting the gut with a probiotic.
But we're knowing now, there's certain microbiome that are responsible for producing serotonin and dopamine, so these things that are neurotransmitters that are responsible for motivation, responsible for mood, relaxation, sleep, we now know that 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. That's crazy. We always just thought that it was this kind of like this brain chemical, and absolutely it is, but it's the way that our gut actually talks to our brain. So it just becomes so important, I guess, looking after your gut health for mental health, for motivation, for mood, for kind of everything else as well. So, without kind of nerding out completely, it's kind of exciting. We're using specific kind of probiotics for mental health conditions now, and looking back at let's get your gut health kind of really good while we're giving you some support, obviously on a psychological level with a psychologist or whoever's kind of looking after them in that regard, as well as nutritionally and potentially supplementally or herbally, but also making sure that we're really looking at those kind of underlying factors as well.
We think of the gut as being totally separate from the brain, but there are a lot of ways that they communicate with each other. So when we have these immune cells that are in the gut, and those immune cells are communicating with the bacteria that live in the gut, the microbiome, they're communicating also with the foods that are coming through and any other kinds of compounds. When the immune system in the gut sees something that it thinks could be a problem, it starts to release things called cytokines. And these inflammatory cytokines are kind of like walkie-talkie to immune cells all over the body, saying, danger, danger, there's a problem. And what happens is it kind of puts them all on high alert. It makes them active, and that could be in the lungs, it could be in the skin, and it can be in the brain, because these cytokines cross the blood-brain barrier into the nervous system. If it's ongoing though, then you can see a lot of different kinds of conditions, because the neurons are not going to function as they should. And that's when we see things like headaches or behavior issues or explosive behavior or mood issues, including depression or anxiety or OCD or even autism. And we know that in autism, there's been a lot of research that shows that the gut flora are completely different in children with autism, and that they do seem to have an influence on behavior and on language and on general cognitive development. So we know that connection between the gut and the immune system and the brain is central and pivotal to all different kinds of conditions, and that even includes multiple sclerosis. It includes Alzheimer's and ALS and Parkinson's as well.
Wow. So what do we do? What do we do to remedy what happens here?
Well, the key thing is really to look at, again, start in the gut, right? Take care of the soil. You can't grow healthy plants without healthy soil. And so you can't have a healthy body and a healthy brain without having a healthy gut. So always starting with the gut. And that means, again, whole foods, unprocessed foods, and looking to make sure that there are foods that aren't causing allergic or even sensitive responses.
I have a patient who is 32 years old, and she was on antibiotics for a long time during her teenage years to treat acne. And as she got into her 20s, she noticed changes in her gut and her ability to process food. And things started to progress where it wasn't just processing food, but then she started to develop other symptoms. She had bad eczema, autoimmune thyroid, and anxiety and depression. So when I meet this patient and she's seeing me for digestive issues, I look at this list: anxiety, depression, autoimmune thyroid, eczema, and hear this story of the exposure to antibiotics for years as a teenager. And it's very, very obvious to me that the root of her problems lies in her gut. And it's not easy, because what I want to do is I want to maximize plant-based diversity. But I know that that's going to be a process for her because her gut is coming from a place of weakness. And so essentially what we had to do is we had to slowly reintroduce foods, and she had to keep a food diary to identify which foods she struggled to process that would cause gas, bloating, and diarrhea for her. But with a probiotic, a prebiotic supplement, and slowly drifting towards a plant-based diet, focusing with every meal on diversity of plants, focusing when she went to the supermarket on diversity of plants, over the course of a year, it was amazing the changes that happened with her. And from a digestive perspective, from a GI symptom perspective, she felt so much better. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. But the other part that was cool is that her mood improved. She became less reliant on antidepressants. She was able to taper them down, and to the point that she came off of them. Insomnia improved. Her eczema actually improved. And she needed less of her thyroid medicine. She wasn't able to come off of it completely, but it decreased substantially. And so it's just absolutely fascinating when you can connect the dots between these different organ systems and bring it back to one place, and lifestyle changes, dietary changes, that can have such an amazing influence on someone's health at a young age. And she's 32. And with these changes, she's never felt better than she does right now. And this is going to carry forward for the next 60 years for her. And I find that to be a very exciting thing.
And I want you to think about this. So we know that toddlers who have less diversity of gut bacteria are more cranky, more antisocial. They're just not as happy children. The same thing is true later in life. They found the same thing with alcoholics. They found that alcoholics specifically who had less diversity of gut bacteria found it harder to overcome their addictions to alcohol. This is amazing. Do you think about that? That could you actually be struggling with addiction because of lack of diversity of gut bacteria? Now, this is a fascinating concept. Now, as the scientists looked at it, they looked at a group of alcoholics, and they found that the ones with greater diversity of gut bacteria found less anxiety, less depression, and less craving for their alcohol. So we might want to ask them, how can I get more good bacteria in my gut? The idea is, I could just kill it off with a bunch of antibiotics. What's fascinating about that is every time you take a round of antibiotics, you go to the doctor and they say, go through this round of antibiotics. It'll take you, 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever it is. That's a round of antibiotics. Every time you take a round of antibiotics, it increases your chances of depression by about 25%. And for every 2 to 5 rounds that you take, it increases your chances of depression by right around 50%. So this may be another factor. We already know that children who don't have as much diversity of bacteria, they're not as happy. Same thing with adults.
Dr. Marshall, can you tell me a bit about the gut-brain connection and how we can enhance our mental health by enhancing our gut?
Right, yes. Yeah, I mentioned earlier a little bit about sort of the opposite, where the stress of the gut, the stress of the things going on in your life can affect the gut, but it's the other way around too. So, the microbiome is responsible for creating serotonin and triggering serotonin. So serotonin is kind of the buzzword here, because serotonin is what is responsible for pretty much all the other function in the brain, as far as the pituitary and creating how the pituitary signals and creates patterns like ovulation and melatonin and sleep patterns. So and then everybody knows that as far as serotonin goes, it regulates mood, and especially depression and anxiety. So you actually have serotonin receptors in 2 places. You have them in the brain, which everybody knows about because Prozac, right? We all are familiar with that. But we also have serotonin receptors in the gut, and we actually have more serotonin receptor function and activity in the gut than we even have in the brain. So there's some theory that there's a lot of people who call the gut actually the first brain. And this is actually the second brain. This was an appendage that we added on later when we had to be more sophisticated than an earthworm. We grew ahead. But the first brain is actually in the gut. And that's why we have what we call a gut response or a gut instinct. You've probably heard of those terms, because again, we have so much emotional connection in the gut.
And I'll speak from my point of view. In psychiatry, the microbiome is extremely important in helping to make neurotransmitters. And 95% of the serotonin is made in the gut. Our B vitamins are made in the gut. And in order to make serotonin, dopamine, GABA, you need B vitamins. We also need B vitamins for many other reactions. So we're killing our friends with cell phones and bad diet and toxins. I mean, if we're eating glyphosate, which is it's in Roundup, it's the Monsanto devil. When we do that, we're also destroying our gut wall and our microbiome. So we have exposures that we've never had before. So that's why disease is rampant.
So is it possible to have a healthy mind without having a healthy microbiome?
I don't think you can have a healthy mind without a healthy microbiome, because it's such a synergy. The microbiome is so vital to every aspect of our health. And the more we learn about it, the more we're finding out how vitally important it is. But what's interesting too is there are specific microbiota, specific bugs that do specific things. For example, you can get probiotics that actually increase mood, that actually counter depression, antidepressant probiotics, because they contain certain bugs that do that actually help restore a good mood.
And so gut health very, very directly affects our mental health, both just basic things like foggy brain, brain fog, memory, the ability to recall things, not just short-term memory, but long-term memory, in the ability to organize one's thoughts, your capacity to focus and pay attention to one thing for any amount of time, okay? All of those things are dependent on a healthy gut. Bottom line. if we don't have a healthy gut, all of those things will suffer. Yeah. So what conditions does that look like? Well, that looks like Alzheimer's. That looks like dementia. That looks like ADD, ADHD. That looks like sensory integration issues. That looks like autism.
Depression, anxiety.
You know, the whole gamut. There's all of these conditions are tied into gut health or lack thereof.
When you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky brain barrier. And that's the barrier that protects your brain from all the different chemicals, toxins that you might be exposed to just by living on this planet.
Can you explain to me leaky gut, leaky brain? Like,
yes.
what does that mean?
So as your gut becomes leaky, we go back to, I was talking about endotoxemia. Endotoxin comes in, stimulates your immune system. Your immune system releases all sorts of cytokines, inflammatory messengers that tell your body it's inflamed. Well, part of that causes the blood-brain barrier, which protects the circulation of the brain, to open up and become leakier. So you get endotoxin into the brain, and then you start getting a brain, we call it a brain on fire. So fire in the gut causes a fire in the brain. And a brain on fire, for example, could be an anxious brain or it could be a depressed brain. And again, where is the problem? Is the problem in the brain or is it in the gut? The problem started in the gut. And the gut needs to heal in order to start putting out the fire in the brain.
But they can give injections of endotoxin to a healthy person, and then they'll be depressed for the next 5 or 6 hours. They'll become anxious for 5 or 6 hours. They'll become less calm for 5 or 6 hours, which is really quite amazing. And because you look at what people are eating, the typical Western diet, which is associated with higher risk of developing anxiety, higher risk of developing depression, is that when they're eating their meal, they're eating a dietary approach which nourishes those endotoxin-containing bacteria and facilitates the absorption of the endotoxin, which then gets into the bloodstream, causes inflammation, changes neurotransmitters, and that's happening with every meal. 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and it's not surprising that again, depression is extremely common. And as I mentioned before, it's very much tied into the Western diet. We know that people who follow a Mediterranean-style diet have much lower risk of developing depression. And there's been some other fantastic research done in Australia showing that a high-fiber diet, rich in sort of prebiotic-containing foods, was actually a very useful treatment for depression. And it's really working there by changing the microbiota, improving gut integrity so you're not getting those endotoxins coming into the system.
We now know that when you have intestinal hyperpermeability or hyperleaky gut, that these inflammation chemicals can actually cross the blood-brain barrier and trigger inflammation in the brain. And when it does, it creates neuroinflammation, and the symptom of that is, number one symptom is brain fog. So we talked about how can people self-identify whether they have a brain problem. If you have brain fog, most likely you have some type of inflammation going on in your brain that's blocking nerve conduction velocity. So the nerve cells cannot conduct messages as efficiently. So your mental processing speed slows, and that's perceived as a veil over your eyes or brain fog. So know that if you experience brain fog, you can basically say, I have inflammation in my brain. And that may be coming from the gut through intestinal hyperpermeability or hyperleaky gut, or that can be purely coming from the brain if you have a concussion or head injury. That can happen without having a gut. But we now also know that if you have a concussion, within hours you get leaky gut in animal studies. And we see this bear out in veteran population who were in combat having blast injuries, concussive injuries in combat, or football players, right, with the big NFL, with movie being made about it, that when you have concussion, that inflammation in the brain can also trigger down and cause inflammation in the gut. Inflammation in the gut can trickle up and cause inflammation in the brain. It's a vicious cycle yet again. So how do you break that vicious cycle? You can start with the gut. Most people can start there, right? Because we do this motion several times a day called eating. So if you can alter what you put in by putting things that are more health promoting, less dysglycemic, right? Not so sugary and has whole foods in it, then you can change that, right? And then supplementation can help. But that's the first step to understand that connection. and then you can influence with diet and supplementation.
I think the big problem today is that we've lost connection with ourselves, and in turn lost connection with the earth and where our food comes from. And we need to reconnect with where our food comes from and eating not packaged foods, not things that are processed, but eating the real foods that come from the earth, which are healthy for the gut and healthy for our bodies. I think that's it's as simple as in all the complexity of the choices, it really is very simple. Go to the produce section of the supermarket and bypass all the other areas until the very end. But really, the majority of your grocery dollars should be spent buying things that come from the earth and choosing foods that are organic if possible. But really, it's about reconnecting where food comes from, because it's become so depersonalized that people don't know how to heal because they don't even know what to eat.
Pharmaceutical drugs are the conventional method of treating anxiety and depression. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, are commonly prescribed to relieve depression by prolonging the life of serotonin in the body. While these treatments can be a useful and effective tool for short-term stabilization, they don't resolve the root cause for low serotonin levels in the body. Additionally, these pills commonly cause an array of side effects, including insomnia, nausea, headaches, dizziness, and weight gain, among other things. So when looking for lasting solutions to mental health issues, it's important that we view the body holistically and search for the core reasons why the brain may not be performing optimally. When we choose this approach, we can improve the whole body, which can then improve our minds without any of the side effects.
The issue with today and mental health is that we've separated the head from the body. And I don't know if anyone's noticed, but there's this huge neck. And this huge neck carries nerves, and there is a connection between the body and the brain. And when you separate those two and you just look at, oh, you're depressed, we'll give you an antidepressant, you have missed a big part of what is happening. And we know that when we decimate the gut microbiome, we lose our precursors to our neurotransmitters. That's number one. Number two, there's something called the vagus nerve that is connected from the brain, and vagus means wandering. So what it does is it comes down and then it wanders through all of the systems of the body, but especially the gut. The enteric nervous system in the gut is connected so greatly with that vagus nerve and straight back up. So when you start to see this, and if you have a disturbance in one, you can have a disturbance in the head. If you have a disturbance in the head, even your thinking will disturb your stomach. We know this. So we live in a world of mechanism. Mechanism being, okay, you have a heart problem, we'll take you to the cardiologist. He doesn't look at your gut. He doesn't look at your brain. He doesn't look at anything else. He just looks at your heart. Or you have joint pain. They're just going to look at your joint. They're not going to look at your gut. We live in a mechanistic world, and there's an importance to mechanism. So if I'm in a car accident, I don't want anyone looking at my nutrition. I'm not going to go to a chiropractor. I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm going straight to the doctor to fix whatever it is. Like I've got to get a stitch up. That's mechanism at its best. But I think that we've gone way too far to mechanism, and we need to look at vitalistic properties. So vitalism means that, okay, you're depressed. Why are you depressed? What's happening in your home life? What's your diet life like? Do you get out into the sunshine? Do you exercise? You know, all of these things are so important. So when we're looking at the gut-brain axis, we're looking vitalistically. We're not looking mechanistically.
I think it's really unfortunate that psychiatry does not, in general, test the organ that it's treating. So it's like a black box. It's, oh, you have a symptom, let's give you a pill. It makes no sense at all because they don't know the source of the disturbance. I mean, somebody can be having anxiety because they have low blood sugar. And they may be having low blood sugar because they're eating a bad diet with a lot of simple carbs. They're eating a lot of sugar. and white flour. So they're having episodes of low blood sugar. So giving them a pill is not going to really address the issue. So giving them an SSRI is actually counterproductive because it's not giving them the skills they need to cope with life. And this is another really bad issue, and that is a lot of people become manic on the SSRIs. And then they're diagnosed as, oh, we unmasked bipolar illness, as if it was lurking there in the bushes, and giving them an SSRI popped out the manic behavior. Not so. It caused it. These SSRIs are pretty powerful, and they do change your brain chemistry, and it can overstimulate and overshoot and have someone get really high. So then they're put on bipolar meds. So it'll be a mood stabilizer, an antipsychotic, as well as the antidepressant. And then sometimes they're also put on a stimulant because they're getting tired on these meds, and they need to be, they're at school, they're working, whatever. So they're on a whole cocktail of meds. So rather than they're coming to a doctor who's actually helping them to heal, very sad that the doctor has actually made them more ill. And the treatment for the side effect is even worse.
I look at a test called the organic acid test, and only one company that makes a really great one called Great Plains. I love it because it's got 3 neurotransmitters on there. We can track serotonin, dopamine, and adrenaline. These are all neurotransmitters that signal things in our nervous system. And when we don't have enough of these, or too much, there's a sweet zone. Too much isn't good either. That means they're burning out too fast. Then people don't feel really good. They're always searching for a reward somewhere because they don't feel calm and rooted, right? So it could be an addiction, like sex, porn, computer, games, right? Food, sugar, any of those. If they don't have good motility, it could be low serotonin. So we need serotonin because it drives all our gut motility. So we try to bring that on board. Dopamine and adrenaline are all related. So when we fix the gut, what we'll see is these neurotransmitters normalize pretty quick, in a month or 2 often.
This was a fascinating project. This is a patient of mine, Ross, who absolutely appreciates me sharing his story and wants to get his message out to everybody. And Ross came to me dealing with severe bipolar disorder. And again, I'm not a big fan of labels, but he was definitely labeled as somebody with bipolar. And he came to me on a lot of medications. And his goal was to approach this from a natural perspective. And so as I practice in my clinic, I run a lot of functional medicine diagnostics with each patient to help us get to the root of the problem. And when we did a workup with Ross, we found out that he had a tremendous amount of intestinal permeability or leaky gut. We found out that his microbes were off. We had overgrowth of yeast and other dysbiotic organisms. We had not enough good bacteria that are huge for promoting a lot of the nutrients, not only producing the nutrients such as the B vitamins, but helping the body absorb the other nutrients such as minerals and other very key aspects for proper mental health. And the big takeaway on top of that was that we found and discovered that Ross was riddled with a huge amount of toxic heavy metals such as mercury. And so as we started to put together a plan for Ross, he started to slowly need less and less of his medications. And again, we don't advise this to our patients right off the bat, but this is a very important thing. When they start feeling better, they get very excited and they work with our team to help wean off the medications as they can. So Ross was able, in a short period of time, to get his life back. He was told he wasn't going to be anything. He was told, he literally at one point was in a straitjacket and was told that you're going to be on these medications for life. Don't expect anything to come to fruition with your life. You just have to accept that. And Ross, being the amazing man he is, didn't accept that. He's a searcher. And he went out and he looked for the answers, and that's how we met. He was living on a beach in Costa Rica and flew to see us in Toronto, and the rest is history. And in the documentary, which is helping a tremendous amount of people, is called Bipolarized. And it's been a huge help to a lot of people dealing with similar situations.
What an amazing story. That's so great that you were able to offer him a solution when obviously the rest of the world had told him that he was destined to live that terrible life forever.
Yeah, so, it was really powerful, and Ross and I are dear friends to this day, and as a result of his success, we've continued to get the message out about mental health and functional medicine and what else we can do to help people really create a customized program.
So can you tell me any of the details of that story? Like, what did you do with Ross to improve his gut to improve his brain?
Well, once we ran the appropriate test and discovered that there were some issues, some underlying causes, that's the real tenet that we need to be following. It's not about masking the symptoms anymore. It's about find those hot spots, find those underlying factors, and remove them, and put your body into a healing environment and see what happens. So with Ross, we did a functional medicine workup with him, which is really using some deep analytics and really sophisticated lab tests that are very easy to run, but they give us a tremendous amount of information about possible root causes or underlying triggers. And when we did this workup with Ross, we identified a number of issues. Not only did he have crazy amounts of heavy metals such as mercury, we also discovered that he had intestinal permeability, he had all sorts of imbalances of his good bacteria, he had an overgrowth of yeast, he had tremendous amounts of nutrient deficiencies that we could specifically identify. And then we had a GPS and we had a roadmap at that point so that we could follow and put him on a very precise program that was using natural means. So we had Ross doing different types of nutraceuticals, which are supplements. We had him on a gut repair program. And we also had him on, once we got the gut figured out and had that really stabilized, which I believe is very important to do first. Then at that point we started to address some of the toxins, such as these heavy metals, such as mercury, and we removed them very safely and gently on his body over time. And Ross started to see a tremendous improvement as a result, and he is a huge advocate of making sure that you treat the root of the problem, and that's, again, really what my passion is.
So if someone comes into your office and they're struggling from depression and anxiety, is the gut part of your protocol to bring them into health?
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely. We always look at the gut. The gut is always the first thing to be managed and sorted out and evaluated. You know, whether it's you know, the microbiome not being healthy, it's not allowing proper absorption of B12 or B6 activation. You know, the gut bacteria is doing all that, and if you don't have those types of nutrients being absorbed or activated, you know, you can't make serotonin, and you can't make dopamine, and you can't make GABA, so you can't relax, and you can't be happy, and you can't feel joy, and you don't have motivation. So yeah, the gut bacteria has a huge amount of factor in serotonin production and mood regulation, and we definitely, that's the first thing I always work out. Yeah.
So what's your process with them? Where do you start, and what process do you take your patients through?
Anxiety and depression and those types of symptoms, the first thing I go at is, well, there's a couple things. One of them is I like to look at the habits and the behaviors that are going on. So is the person, you know, just the basics, like, are they sleeping well? You know, do they have a reasonable bedtime? Do they sleep through the night? Because we know how that affects the microbiome, right? And then that affects how their mood is.
There are also other things that are involved. So for example, some people are very sensitive to gluten, and that can be at the level of celiac disease, which is the autoimmune problem that destroys the gut, and there are neuropsychiatric manifestations of celiac disease. In fact, some people can even have psychosis because of celiac disease. And when you take gluten away from them, their psychosis resolves. And this is in the literature, it's documented there. It's just that unfortunately it's not as well recognised by our colleagues. But then there are, I believe, and this is increasingly recognised in the literature, there are non-celiac manifestations of gluten intolerance, and it can affect mood, brain fog, etc. And when we remove that, and I'm not saying everyone needs to be off gluten, I'm just saying in some people, they do better when we remove that from their diet, and their brain fog improves, they think clearly, their headaches go away, their lethargy improves, their energy levels improve, and you know, their mental health subsequently improves.
The first step, of course, is the diet, but let me tell you that for some people, I have fantastic results with only working on the dietary issues and healing their gut. So I had a patient who came to me with a severe depression. She was crying all day. She was suicidal. And in her case, while we were doing the workup for other factors affecting that depression, I started her on a whole foods diet, eliminate the gluten, eliminate the dairy, since that's another inflammatory factor for people. And this lady came back a few weeks later, and her depression was gone. It was completely gone. Like, that's all I needed to do in her case. Well, I believe I started a few key nutrients like fish oil and vitamin D and B vitamins that are also helpful for the brain. But it was amazing. It was gone, and she was scheduled to have a surgery for her hip, and her hip inflammation went away, and she didn't need to do that.
So, diet. What do you recommend for a gut healthy, brain healthy meal plan?
Okay, let's just take real simple steps. Michael Pollan said eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I think he was right. I realise that practically, not everyone's going to become a whole food plant-based eater, but it's certainly the dietary pattern that I try to promote to people. That's because the evidence is getting stronger and stronger that style of eating, and when I say whole foods, I'm eating foods that were as they were grown in nature, as unprocessed as possible. Obviously we do process food, and I'm not opposed to processing. I'm not particularly keen on eating raw eggs. I'm going to process it by boiling it, or having raw rice. I don't particularly want to eat that. I'm going to process it a bit. But in general, if we eat foods as close to as they were grown, that tends to feed a healthy microbiome in our gut. Now there are specific situations where you might need a practitioner to work with you on certain style of eating patterns that may not be as strongly whole food plant-based as others. For example, food allergies or intolerances. Sometimes people with epilepsy might respond to a ketogenic style eating pattern. So there are different approaches that can be made, and obviously we talked earlier about gluten-free, and in some people that's important. Not everybody needs to do that. I certainly find some people do well off dairy too, and in a whole food plant-based diet you're not generally promoting dairy. But if we do look at the evidence in the literature, I would say, from my understanding of a cursory look at that, probably the best evidence lies in the Mediterranean style eating pattern. And I think a lot of people, well, what does that mean? And I think if I was, again, to keep it simple, to summarise it, it generally means a reasonable amount of plant foods. They eat a lot of salad-based sort of plant foods. They eat a little bit of fermented dairy, for example, some feta cheese. They have some oily fish in their diet, and they have whole grains. They're not eating pasta all day long, but that's a sort of style. And they eat a lot of vegetables. So that's sort of a Mediterranean style eating pattern.
In my case, I developed what's called multiple chemical sensitivity, so I got allergic to everything. My immune system was just on hyperdrive. It was reacting to everything. I was allergic to many, many kinds of foods. I couldn't walk into a grocery store because the smells of the chemicals would give me rashes and hives. I was just covered with rashes and hives. And completely, with all that inflammation that was happening coming out through my skin, of course it was a systemic inflammation. I had severe fatigue. I could barely get out of a chair for a year. And with all that inflammation, it was eating out my brain. So I was doing dementia trials, and I came to realize that I was as cognitively impaired as some of my patients in the trial. I would do a test called a many mental status, where I'd give them 3 words to remember, and I'd have to write down the 3 words so that I could ask them a few minutes later, because I couldn't remember those words. And I had given that test for over 20 years, so that was quite an amazing realization, that I had no short-term memory. I think I was just trying so hard to survive every day. People asked me, were you scared? And every day was just such a struggle trying to function at my normal level, which of course I clearly wasn't doing at that point. I could barely dial a phone number. I would get confused sometimes and have to start over 2 or 3 times. I would be drooling in a nursing home by now if I had not done all that I had done to reverse that inflammation and that cognitive decline. How did I get better? Little by little, I went through all the modules through the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I first went to a conference called Food is Medicine, and that opened my eyes. It changed my life. It changed my practice. It changed my life. To understand how food has the power to turn on and off our genes, affect our microbiome, and affect everything in our health. So, I mean, I ate a relatively healthy diet, but it was definitely an eye-opener with that. And
some things were inflammatory for you, though, weren't they?
Well, at the point for me, I mean, I had become sensitive to everything. So many foods. I went on a diet that eliminated gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, nuts, seafood, later legumes, later nightshades. I was reacting to pretty much everything. But what happens when you're in that state is it's that your gut is so leaky that every single thing you eat is getting through those microscopic holes in your gut and activating your immune system. So in that case, the real key becomes heal your gut. do everything you can to, heal that leaky gut so that all of that stuff is not chronically activating your immune system. And that, of course, is a process. And when you're as sick as I was, it was not a fast process. I would say, it took me 8 months of that very restricted diet to start to make some headway with the rashes and hives that were all over me. And my patients will say, how could you stay on that diet for so long? And I tell them I had no other option. There was no options. I could take steroids, they would suppress my immune system, but that I knew enough that wasn't going to be the answer to heal anything. And we know that when somebody is really allergic to gluten, which I certainly was, there's these little villi that line the gut. And they're like little finger-like projections, and they absorb our nutrients from our food. And when you actually have a gluten allergy, those things get chopped off and blunted. And it takes about 8 months for those villi to regrow when you stop your gluten for somebody that's gluten sensitive. And it's interesting, I learned that after the fact. And when I thought about my timeline, I thought, about 8 months on that diet is when I started to make some headway. There was a clear time when I felt like my brain came back online. And that's how I thought of it. My brain was offline and suddenly it was online again.
Then there are other things around a couple of other specific nutrients. And I would say probably the most important ones here are copper and zinc. So zinc is very important for brain health. It's linked with a number of enzyme systems that are involved in the brain, and low levels of zinc are associated, it hasn't been proven to cause, but are associated with depressive illnesses and mental health problems. And I guarantee me, and if there's any colleagues out there who are watching, that is medical colleagues, go and for your next 10, 20 depressed patients, test their zinc level, do a plasma zinc level on them. And I think you'll find that the majority of them will be in the low, if not frankly deficient range in the reference range of your laboratory. And I found when we raise those zinc levels, people do better.
Zinc, it's pretty obvious how to increase that. How do you get copper lower?
Well, ironically, zinc and copper compete. So if you give zinc, you'll actually lower copper. So you tend to do two birds with one stone in that aspect. You've got to be a little bit careful because some people are sensitive to dosing of zinc, and as they lower copper they actually get agitated temporarily, so that's what we call copper dumping, and it's a bit weird but it does happen, and I tell all my patients about it because if they didn't know they would think what I was doing for them is making them worse and would stop. So yes, copper dumping is a real phenomenon, but as I say, I can't predict who it's going to happen to, so some it may not. But they just need to know about it. And most of the time it's mild and they pass through it and then they just feel a lot better.
Yeah, so another story, a young girl, or she's probably in her mid-30s, with really terrible anxiety, and she reacts badly to medications. I'm talking anxiety like a disabling anxiety, can't sleep, but then kind of can't get up in the morning, very difficult to kind of go work, having panic attacks on public transport. She can't cross the Harbour Bridge or go in the tunnel. So if they go to the north side, they have to kind of like go the long way around. So those really sort of like, I want to say irrational fears, but that deep-seated kind of like anxiety to lots of different kind of situations. And we started off by just working on her food and her gut. So she had terrible diarrhea. So she had loss of appetite. She was often nauseous. Her bowels were running kind of like, like 3 or 4 times a day and always kind of really loose and always really urgent. So she'd lost a lot of weight and she was just eating like bread and just like really simple things like that. And I think when you don't have a big appetite, it's easy to come home and she would just have like a bowl of muesli when she got home. She'd have a piece of toast in the morning, so some sushi for lunch, a few office biscuits in the afternoon. So, when I was about to say not terrible, it's kind of terrible, but not terrible in the sense that it wasn't just lollies and pizzas and things like that, but it really was lacking protein and vegetables and really probably wasn't very favourable to her gut health. And so we would go back to that, serotonin and dopamine, so much of that is being produced by the gut. You know, we've got more of this kind of coming through in the gut than kind of anywhere else. So we started off with just trying to kind of like settle her nervous system down a little bit more. And we did, you know, mindfulness and all those kind of, you know, gentle walking and things like that as well. But we really kind of worked on diet. So just really easy to digest and prepare foods. You know, so she did still have some of those kind of more carbohydrate things in. I wasn't very successful in getting them out all the way, but we replaced things with, like, you know, rice thins. If she was going to just do an easy dinner, it was like rice thins with, say, avocado and smoked salmon, or, you know, so there was a protein, there was a bit of fat, so it was kind of like something fresh in there. So we sort of started to get the fiber element up. I also got her to be doing some chia seeds in the morning. She was kind of happy doing that with some banana, like a little banana chia pudding sort of thing. So got her having a lot more fiber, more vegetables, still not eating kind of like a lot. And the first thing to kind of improve were her bowel movement. So she, you know, started to stop getting that sort of runny tummy, the butterfliesy kind of feeling went away. Sleep and everything like that still took just like that little bit kind of longer. But, you know, we were using specific probiotics. We're using, you know, gut healing formulas with things like, you know, slippery elm, you know, SB or Saccharomyces boulardii, which is great for diarrhea as well, which is like a beneficial yeast. We used a heap of kind of glutamine and turmeric. You know, I had herbal teas going with her, things like meadowsweet tea, fennel tea, ginger tea, just to really kind of like settle down the whole kind of digestive system. So without using, we did use zinc as well. So zinc's great for gut healing. It's also very good for anxiety. What we did was basically just settled her whole nervous system down, and she was like, within, you know, like a month, she's like, I'm just like so much kind of better. And I was thinking, we haven't really done enough because you haven't, like, you know, you don't want me to use herbs, and we can't use this and we can't use that and all that kind of stuff, and we've just gone really basic. But, you know, we were probably both surprised in a way, not really, but kind of, that she was sort of so much better. She can go over the bridge, she can go over the tunnel, you know, so she can go to Palm Beach again without having to kind of go the long way. So she was really happy about that.
And what were the probiotics that you used with her?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a broad spectrum one. I did have the lactobacillus, the Helveticus strain in there, which is kind of quite good for anxiety, and it had like 5 or 6 other strains there as well. So it's a bit of a multi-strain in addition to the SB or that Saccharomyces boulardii that I mentioned. So it's like a beneficial yeast that can help to improve the good bacteria, but doesn't stay in the digestive tract afterwards.
So what were the stronger herbs that you used with her?
Yeah, so we ended up using SAMI, or S-adenyl methionine. Which is, you know, sort of just works a little bit more on the neurotransmitters and sort of a bit of a precursor to kind of serotonin. I only ended up using withania with her, which is like the most gentle kind of nervous system herb anyway. It's considered to be more of an adaptogen as anything else. And I did end up using kava for her as well, which is a much stronger kind of anti-anxiety. And, you know, with that and fish oils, zinc and B6, and obviously we'd done a heap of pathology testing and made sure that, you know, she didn't have any thyroid issues. The B vitamins were fine. She didn't have any methylation issues. She actually really didn't have much going on. She was really low in vitamin D. We sorted that out. She didn't really have too much kind of going on in her pathology as well. We didn't end up doing like a stool analysis or anything because she was kind of feeling so much better and didn't need to spend the money on that. I mean, it would always be nice to just for like my nerd side, but for the patient, you know, she didn't really need to spend $300 or $400 on that, you know, and so those things have you know, got her feeling really good.
I think probably one of my most early impressive results was in a 4-year-old girl who her parents had brought her to me, and she had never ever slept through the night up to the age of 4. She had a lovely personality sometimes, and then was an absolute rat bag at other times. She'd go up and down in mood substantially. It was really very difficult. Like, her parents had not slept properly for a long time, and they were despairing. So when I worked with her, I did some tests on her, I figured out what kind of chemistry was going on, then we started a supplemental regime for her. And within a week or two, she'd started, actually it was within the first week, she started sleeping through the night for the first time. And then a couple of weeks later, she said to her parents for the very first time, "I love you." I mean, and they were just flabbergasted. And then for the very first time, about 3 months to 6 months later, they were able to go on a family holiday because she was able to be well behaved and settle down and sleep properly. I mean, that had an enormous impact on that family.
So
Yes.
that was largely just through vitamins and
That was
supplements?
through targeted vitamin supplements.
Yeah, and that was that the zinc for her as well?
Yeah, so there was a particular program that I used for her which replaced certain vitamins like zinc, vitamin B6. That's another crucial nutrient I didn't talk about so much earlier, but very important. There was some magnesium and a couple other things. And I should say, don't try this at home. You really do need advice about how to do it, because you can harm yourself with certain nutrients if you don't know what you're doing. So you need some advice from a practitioner who knows how to do it. There are certain things that are not very likely. Like, for example, if you took some zinc, in a reasonable dose, that you're very unlikely to harm yourself with that, or some magnesium, you're very unlikely to harm yourself. So certainly go nuts with that. But other things like vitamin B6, get some advice before you take that, because you can cause a peripheral nerve damage if you take too high doses of B6 for too long. And that's something that we don't want to see, obviously, in our patients. So do get some advice. However, that's the style of stuff I use with her, and as I say, dramatic improvement, night and day improvement. Now, not everybody gets that level of dramatic improvement. Some it's more minor. But look, I did also have, I've had literally adult patients who have said to me, "You have saved my life, because if this didn't work, I was going to commit suicide. I had come to the end of my tether with antidepressants, with all the drugs, everything. Nothing was working for me." And she had felt the best that she'd felt in the last 10, 20 years. I had one guy who he used to get panic attacks. And he was getting them quite frequently. There didn't seem to be any major triggers or reasons why. And this particular person had a copper-zinc imbalance. And when I corrected that, they went away. And he has had none for the last 2 years. I mean, this or whatever it is, 3 or 4 years now. He's very, very happy. It's changed his life.
If you're unwell and your day is surrounded with what time you have to take what medication, because you're on so many medications, and you're like just feeling like you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired of managing all these drugs and all their side effects, maybe then it's time to really take a look at the body itself as a holistic, approach. In other words, you're taking one pill for this and one pill for that and one pill for this, and what you might need to do is really sit down and have an honest talk with yourself about how you're feeding your body and how you're feeding that organ called the microbiome, which is something that is happy to change if we just take the right behavioral steps and do a couple things to enhance the wellness of the microbiome. You will find you will start to be able to lose those medications and, at some point hopefully be off of a majority, if not all of them. And have a good doctor. I think the doctors are, it's frustrating as a patient to go to the doctor and be told, "Oh, you're fine, you just need to just diet and exercise," right? They tell you that, but they don't give you specifics, and they don't really encourage you or direct you. But also just deciding, like, do you want to live this way? Do when there's simple things you can do behaviorally, like just turning off the TV at a reasonable hour, making sure you're getting to bed at a reasonable hour. If there are things disrupting your sleep, figure them out. If it's the dog jumping on the bed, teach him to sleep on the floor. If it's your husband snoring like a log next door to you, have him see the doctor and have him get checked for sleep apnea too, and get some earplugs and sort out what you need to do to get that sound restorative sleep, because that's probably the number one thing that affects the microbiome. And just and the dietary piece. Health is one thing that you can have all the money in the world. I know people who have a lot of money, but you know what? They're not healthy and they're miserable because they don't feel well. So, your health is really the thing that brings you through life, and you do have a lot of control over that. You just have to make some of the right behavioral choices and have some good guidance by a doctor, a functional medicine doctor, or integrative doctor, or just getting online and looking into it yourself and doing your own research. I mean, we're so blessed in this day and age. We can go online and there's so much at our fingertips that we can understand and read now that we don't have a lot of excuses left about You know, why we're letting ourselves kind of be run by the medical industry and all the drugs they want to sell and put us on.
Mental health issues detract from happiness and productivity and impair our ability to live a full and satisfying life. It's so exciting to know that by healing our gut, we can not only optimize our physical well-being, but also resolve mental health struggles like depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, and dementia. You won't want to miss the rest of our series as we continue to shine light on underlying causes of pervasive health problems and share practical, actionable tips on how you can enjoy vital health and longevity. In our next episode, we'll take a closer look at problematic infections like parasites and candida and teach you exactly how to clear your body of these health-robbing microbes. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow. But before you go, I have one more thing I want to talk to you about. You see, as you've been watching this series, I'm sure you've had someone special come to mind as you've been watching. It might be a sister or your wife or your son or a cousin or a co-worker or a friend that you've been thinking about that you know would really benefit from hearing this information. Unfortunately, it's likely that it will take a long time for this information to reach the average doctor, because the thing is, we don't have big wealthy businesses and corporations backing the Gut Solution series. We rely on people like you sharing the message and joining the mission to get the tools for gut health out to the rest of the world. So your loved ones need your help, and this is how you can help them, by sharing the message. We've made it easy for you by putting buttons just beneath this video so you can share with your loved ones by email or by Facebook, or you can just text them to let them know where to find this information. So join the movement. Together we can get this information out to the whole world and to all the people that need to hear this information the most. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next episode.